Well, thank you very much. Good evening. It's really a privilege to be back with you, back with so many friends. I'm sorry to be somewhat delayed. As was said, I was on the Senate floor engaged in a fairly extended colloquy, so just came from the floor to be with you now. Although I would note this is a far better arrangement because I would have been speaking to you at a conference with notepads, everyone staring ahead, looking forward to happy hour. And now hopefully everyone is getting liquored up and my remarks after 3 glasses of wine will seem far more insightful than they ever would ordinarily. Everyone here is here because we care about space. We love space. We're inspired by space. Texas has a long history with space exploration. From President Kennedy's historic 1962 call at Rice University to go to the moon, to the very first word ever uttered on the surface of the moon, the name of my hometown, Houston, the eagle has landed. To the very first private rocket launch on Matagorda Island, Texas has always been a leader with space, and I have every confidence we will continue to be leading space exploration. We're also seeing an incredible renaissance in terms of commercial space. A decade ago, the developments we've seen in commercial space would have been hard to imagine. And yet we are seeing the commercial space industry right down to yesterday, SpaceX's successful Falcon Heavy test launch. Congratulations, by the way. Which I note was tested in McGregor, Texas. And I have no doubt that the men and women of McGregor are standing proud today at that historic launch. But the coordination between the private sector, the growing commercial space industry, and NASA is something that has dramatically expanded our ability to reach to infinity and beyond. To coin a phrase that's never been used before. And I will say this is, as we all know, a time of deep partisan divisions in Washington. On virtually every issue, it seems Democrats and Republicans are at each other's throats. And gridlock, more often than not, is what we see in Congress. And yet, one of the few notable exceptions to that has been in space. I've been proud to chair the Science and Space Subcommittee of the Senate Commerce Committee. And in that tenure chairing the Space Subcommittee, we passed not one but 2 major pieces of legislation impacting space. In 2015, the Commercial Space Launch Competitiveness Act, which was signed by President Obama. And in 2017, the NASA Reauthorization Bill, which was signed by President Trump. There are not many issues on which signature legislation has been signed off on by Presidents Obama and Trump. Indeed, I challenge you to find much of anything other than space. And it's a testament to the bipartisan cooperation that we've seen. In passing both of those, I worked hand in hand with Senator Bill Nelson from Florida, worked hand in hand with Republicans and Democrats on the committee, negotiated and pre-negotiated, not just with the Senate, but with the House, getting the NASA Reauthorization Bill. That was the first authorization to come through for NASA in 7 years, going back to 2010. And we negotiated it in expedited time frame, which required pre-negotiating with multiple members of the House For whatever reason, the House thinks it has a role in legislation. And I have to say, for whatever reason, apparently some other states also think they have equities in space. In fact, for anyone who knows Richard Shelby, you know that Alabama would readily seize every space asset from every other state in the Union. And Richard's eyes would twinkle and he wouldn't apologize for a second. But we were able to navigate both state, parochial interests, the differences between the Senate and the House, the differences between Republicans and Democrats, and arrive upon two major pieces of legislation extending the International Space Station, protecting property rights in space, forging a steady foundation for the continued growth of commercial space, and setting a clear and unambiguous target of space exploration that we are going to Mars, and it will be an American who first sets his or her foot on Mars. Yeah. Although they may be stepping out of Elon Musk's car. That is a strange element. I will say one thing that unifies those of us with an interest in space is perhaps a quirky sense of humor. For those of you old enough to have been reared on sci-fi, I will tell you it's a sad statement in my office. And we were talking about a space matter, and I walked over to the computer, picked up the mouse, began speaking into the mouse, going, "Computer!" And I looked around, and none of the 20-somethings or 30-somethings had any idea what I was saying. How can you forget James T. Kirk and Mr. Spock in San Francisco as flower children, saving a whale, making transparent aluminum, and Scotty speaking to a mouse and then looking down and going, "A keyboard, how quaint." But it does make you feel old that I'm looking at my staff, and I think none of my staff now still has any idea what I'm saying. But look, in literature, in art, from time immemorial, men and women have looked to the stars, wondered what's out there, who's out there, what does the future hold? That hope, that inspiration, that has been true for millennia, we have never been closer than right now today to conquering that frontier. So I want to say to everyone here, thank you for the innovative work you do. Thank you for the historic work you do. Thank you for the dangerous work you do. There are not many people who say, let's put you on top of a giant, massive explosive and hope for the best. And yet that's the business y'all are in. You're in the business of heroes and explorers, scientists and innovators. That matters immensely, and I have to say the cooperation we have between NASA and the growing and exploding commercial, exploding is a bad word to use. Expanding, okay, that's very helpful. Commercial space industry, that is powerful. What it means is that space exploration doesn't depend on scarce tax dollars. Because if we had to see tax dollars appropriated sufficiently to get us to Mars, we might be waiting a long, long time. I'll make a prediction here that I've made before, which is that I predict the first trillionaire will be made in space. Maybe someone in this room. In which case, I have to say, brother, can you spare a dime? This is the new frontier. Every frontier has opened unimaginable opportunities, unimaginable challenges. Let me say a couple of additional things. There are reports that the administration's new budget will suggest funding for the ISS. Federal funding would expire in 2025. I hope that those reports prove as unfounded as Bigfoot. If numbskulls at OMB persist in putting out such statements, I would note that those statements would be directly contrary to federal statute. The NASA Authorization Act of 2017 that passed both houses of Congress and that I stood beside the President in the Oval Office as he signed, expressly directed NASA to study extending the ISS to 2028 or even 2030. And a statement from OMB that a budget analyst in a cubicle somewhere has determined that 2025 is the last date we can use it would be directly contrary to federal statute. Would also be unwise. We've seen in space in the past programs whose lifetime is cut short. I'm a fiscal conservative. As a fiscal conservative, you know one of the dumbest things you can do? Canceling programs after billions in investment when there is still serious usable life ahead of you. We have invested massively in the ISS. It has produced enormous benefits to the United States and to the world, and we should use that asset as long as it is technologically feasible and cost-effective to do so. And I can tell you this, as long as I'm chairman of the Science and Space Subcommittee, the ISS will continue to have strong and bipartisan support in the United States Congress. Let me say, secondly, it has been now over a year without a Senate-confirmed head for NASA. The President made a terrific decision, nominating my friend Jim Bridenstine. Jim is a war hero. He was a flight instructor. He was literally a Top Gun instructor. Which means Jim was much cooler than I was doing bad impressions from Star Trek 4. Indeed, Jim's background in many ways reflects the backgrounds we see of our astronauts. Jim is someone well known in this community. He should have been confirmed a long time ago, and every day that Jim Bridenstine is not confirmed is a day that harms space, that harms NASA, and that harms in particular states like Texas, like Florida, like Alabama, like each of the states that have strong equities in a robust space program. We've seen bipartisan cooperation on space. I think it's regrettable that some of my colleagues have chosen to forget that with regard to confirming a NASA administrator. But it is my hope that we move swiftly and expeditiously to confirm Jim Bridenstine so we have a strong, serious leader of NASA who can continue the leadership that we need in that important. And with that, I'm reminded of an admonition from my Irish grandmother, which is never, ever, ever stand between good people and the bar. So thank you, God bless you, and it is a privilege to be with you.